Well, welcome to a new Harry's Farm video. And in this one, I initially thought I was just going to be telling you about the wheat and how it's all coming up, as you can see here, and I'm all very pleased. There are still some problem areas, but it's been quite a week for all farmers in the UK, and that is because of the Labour government and their budget announcements on Wednesday. I then found myself on Nicky Campbell's phone-in programme on Radio 5 the day after, half an hour there talking to Nicky about the implications of it. So, and you've probably read about it in the media, what is happening with this agricultural property relief, the 100% allowance within inheritance tax. Doing that programme with Nicky Grist taught me, although it's immediately obvious to every farmer I know and speak to, the dramatic effect it's going to have on agriculture within the UK. There was a lot of the audience thought, why is it earth does a farmer get 100% inheritance tax relief? What's that all about? And I think the Labour government are deeply mistaken, have been very badly advised of the knock-on implication of putting this £1 million limit on inheritance tax, and it won't affect very many farms. That, in my view, is absolutely not the case. I've spoken to my accountant, who's an agricultural specialist. He was in a slight state of shock on the Wednesday when I spoke to him, because he says the implications for the clients, we're going to have to do so much work. And yet you have Rachel Reeves saying it's hardly going to affect just a handful of farmers. And I don't think so. And I thought it's just worth me going into detail and just explaining how an enormous sum of money, like £1 million, and all these farmers jumping up and down, there seem to a general public to seem to be a complete disconnect. And we get a discount on the inheritance tax, so it's not even 40%, it's 20%. What are you on about? A little bit of background. Farming. It is a very interesting business. I've been in it at my first harvest in 1984, but on my father's side there was a farming happening up in Yorkshire. That farm at the moment is on I think it's third generation. I was just trying to count it back as I'm walking out here. Third generation. And there are numerous other farms, family farms, that are fourth, fifth generation. What I mean by that is they've taken over from their father, and their father took over from the grandfather and the great-grandfather before that. It is a continuous stream of people farming the same farm generation on generation. And what has happened is the value of that farm has slowly increased over the years, and it's had a pretty dramatic increase recently, it has to be said, in the last 10 years. But it's almost immaterial to those family farms what the family is worth. All they concentrate on is managing that farm, they're custodians of it for the period they are farming it. It is a very peculiar business. Unlike any other business I've ever been involved in, you are to the utter mercy of the seasons, and the income you generate from the land bears absolutely no relationship to the value of said land. So when it comes to the point of handover, because there's 100% relief, and there has been for generations, you haven't really thought about it. You just learn the way of managing land, stock, farming, looking after these trees, putting trees in, tree belts, whatever. It's just a skill set that you get, and it's handed over father to son as you go through. And it has kept our landscape as it is. And this is particularly so in the hillside areas, because very few people want to work 7 days a week tending stock on hillside out in all weathers, or actually want to milk cows 7 days a week, twice a day. I worked on a farm, we started at 5:30 in the morning, and then you would finish milking at about 6-7 o'clock. There isn't a queue round the block to take on milking, but if you are born into it and your father was milking and you take over, you soon get hooked in. You've got the breeding cycle, you're trying to get that heifer, is that one of your better cows, and you get hooked into it. The value of the actual holding never gets discussed. All those acres or how you're keeping your cows, how you're going to feed the cows through the winter. It's bizarre, but that is how it happens. And because you haven't ever had to worry about inheritance tax, because you've had this 100% relief, you got on with managing your farm and making it the best you could make it, knowing that you're going to hand over to your kids. That's your sole goal. You want to improve it and have it in good health. And the other thing is, it's a vocation, so you don't really retire from it. And I was looking at the numbers. I think it's 38% of farmers in the UK are over 65. It is a lifetime duty, farming. And there's Rachel Reeves saying, oh, it won't affect us, £1 million, and that's easily enough for it. It is nowhere near enough. The CLA are saying there's going to be 70,000 farm businesses affected by this change in agricultural property relief. And I looked up, there's 108,000 farming businesses. So call it 65, 70% of all farms in the UK are now going to be affected by inheritance tax. They've suddenly got a tax planning to do. And this is the other shock, I think, why the industry is in such shock, because it's not like the tax has gone from 10% to 20%. It was no tax. There was nothing there. You didn't. This is something you just did. You handed on to your son, and that's what you did. But suddenly now you have to. We've got the inheritance tax. We have to manage it, and it's huge numbers we're talking about. So let's discuss about the £1 million relief. Why that isn't really applicable in this situation. To farm today, to actually make a living on a farm, 500 acres is about it. 500 acres should bring in 60,000, somewhere around there. If you actually look at the value of the holding, just the land is going to be 5 million in today's money. You've got a house on it. Unfortunately, you've got a house in the country. It's probably 3 or 4 bed. There's £1 million or 2, 7. To sort out the machinery on a farm, on arable, shall we say, well, today's combines, £500,000. The tractor that does the drilling up here, put this wheat in the ground, 200. The drill that it pulls around, he's just got another one. I think he was telling me it was 140,000. The sprayer that you see operating here, that would set you back 220,000. The thing I use to load the lorries, 70 or 80,000. Hang on a minute. You get to £1 million just on machinery to run a 500 acre farm. Say if you were dairy herds, at least, I think the average herd is around 2,000 for a cow, milking cow, so there's 400,000. Following stock probably adds another 100, so there's 500,000 of stock, and that's probably only a 200, 300 acre farm. They are huge numbers. You also got the buildings, the housing, etc. That's several 100,000. So the £1 million on an average family pound just disappears. Now, Rachel Reed is saying, oh, well, it's 2 and it would come to 2 million and you've got the normal relief, inheritance tax relief as well, and you might get to 2 million. But it's this fact that none of this has actually applied before, and suddenly there's a massive amount of tax planning. Let's go back to that mythical 500 acre farm in the home counties I was talking about earlier. Now, imagine that farm, family farm, and the current owner is in his 80s, and that is not unusual, late 70s, 80s, let's say. And he's still sort of active on the farm, but his family, his son runs the farm, but he helps out feeding the cattle or a bit of grain cart come harvest time, that sort of thing. And he's enjoyed a lifetime on the farm, tending that farm, bringing it on, family still there as well. Happy situation. Probably got grandchildren just coming on board and enjoying the farm as well. And there's no tax planning happened here because there was 100% inheritance relief. So he knew when his time came, there was his family ready to take on the farm, all good. Until that budget, when Rachel Reeves stood up and said £1 million threshold on inheritance tax. Suddenly, just think of that owner in his 90s, glorious life. He now realises that if he lives beyond April 2026, He has landed his family, his whole lifetime creating this, looking after this farm, with an inheritance bill. Should we say, if it's 8 million total with a house and machinery and buildings and land at current values, 1.2 million inheritance bill. And you say, well, he should have planned it, or he should have gifted it. He can gift it. That's only 2 years away. And he's in his 80s already. And I can just see his life is just destroyed. He's just, how's this happened? The farm, as I mentioned, is probably making 50, 60,000 pounds a year. He can't afford a 1.2 million inheritance tax bill. Oh, it's all right, you can pay it over 10 years. That's still 120,000 a year. And that is why farmers are so angry. It's a situation that has come from nowhere. And my example is very common, much more common than you would believe by everybody saying, oh, you could have got round it with the planning and etc. This has come from nowhere, and it's yet another thing that farming is having to deal with. It's having to deal with this very changeable weather. It's having to change government telling us how to grow crops, and you can't do that and you can't use that, and we're going to put a tax on your fertiliser, and you mustn't use nitrogen, and you've got to what you're polluting the. It's like coming from everywhere. They're scratching a living, and you don't mind scratching a living because you're living in this glorious countryside, and there is pleasure to be had from tending your farm and looking after it for the next generation. But suddenly, wham! And that is why I just think of that poor guy when it comes to celebrating Christmas 25, and he's still alive, and then how's he bringing the new year? It's a horrible, horrible situation that is completely going to dominate the next 2 years on those traditional family farms that should be celebrated. And it's the business tax release, James Dyson describing it as the family death tax is just how it feels at the moment. So badly thought out. And the bit you have to understand if you're not involved in farming is the income just doesn't bear any relationship to the capital value of the farm. I remember one of my bank managers who had no other farmer on his books, and he looked at my accounts. He says, I'm going to have to put you on a critical list because your business is in a critical state. To only return that amount on your capital value, I would just close it down. I said, well, welcome to farming. That's why I've got other interests, and I'm very busy diversifying and doing everything I can, because the actual growing of crops is not something that produces an income that bears any relation to the capital value of the farm. That's why we're so angry. And if you've got a mortgage on the farm, so you hand over, there you are, half the farm to your kids, who's paying the mortgage? The bank isn't going to be happy because the security's gone, your holding's gone down in half. How's that all work? And what happens? How are we going to do it? Are we going to sell a little proportion of the farm off? How's that work? The £1 million, the only person I think has been rewarded by this revised inheritance tax is actually the people I think is annoying the Labour Party. Someone who has come out of the city and bought a house with 50 acres. He's now got 100% inheritance tax relief from it. That is not a working farm. That is just someone retiring to the countryside. Oh, that's good. And I do wonder if we have to sell land off to pay the inheritance tax, or my kids have to. Well, he's probably going to sell it to someone with a house. Oh, could I have that 20 acres, 30 acres, please? Because then I can buy a house and I can get inheritance tax free. So I don't think the price of the land is going to go down. Or the other thing that's going to happen is the big institutions saying, hang on a minute, there's a lot of land going to come up for grabs. Now, I sold a farm in 95, I think it was, 96, somewhere around there. And we'd bought it. It was an opportunity that came up, did everything I could get to it, but it was what I would term on the urban fringe. And I soon realised farming on the urban fringe was tricky. We had burnt out cars on almost a weekly basis, just general farming up to people's garden. It was all a bit tricky. And we had it a few years and sold it and basically bought where we are now. But that was bought by Legal and General. And they had a completely different attitude to owning that farm than I had, which was all about managing the farm, how I was going to manage it, and succession, etc. They were all looking at, could they get planning on it? There's a farm just been sold over there and an institution bought it. First thing that arrived was a solar farm. There's another one over there. It's built a load of houses on. If institutions buy land, they want a return on it. They're not interested in managing it for the next generation at all. They've bought it for a reason and they want to make it work. And the biggest ways you can make it work is to build houses on it, turn it into industrial, anything but actually just growing crops as we do and planted trees. Where are you going to plant trees? Why is an institution going to plant trees? Well, you might get a carbon offset and that sort of thing in today's environment. But the land use is going to dramatically change if this is what's going to happen. But I think farmers will do everything they can to hold on to their farms. It's not their fault that they've suddenly ended up sitting on an asset that has gone dramatically up in business. We grow food. That is a farmer's role in this world, is to grow food, to actually give back. It's the enjoyment we do, go through the seasons. That's what we buy a farm for. And this inheritance tax is just killing people because it's suddenly thrown the future out the window. What is that next generation of farmers thinking? Well, I'm not going to take on the farm. If I take on Dad's farm, I've got this huge bill to pay. Or are we at least... I think this story's got to run. I've been nervous about doing anything on it because it's not introduced until April 2026. I think it's such a fundamental mistake and so badly advised, something might well happen before we get to April 2026. If they are asking for my advice what they should do, I think there is a case for having some form of limit on the amount of agricultural property relief, but the limit was not 1 million, it should be 4 or 5 million, because we want to stop the massive investments. I can see that something like Dyson's doing and buying all the farms up could be seen as annoying. There is a limit to how many acres you actually need to own. So you could have a taper relief up to certain limits. The wealthy boys will find a way around it. They'll go into trust or whatever. But it should be tapered. But the 1 million is just a nonsense. That is crucified family farming in the UK because it's much too low a limit. Everybody will now have to do a major amount of tax planning. It's going to rule out the succession happening, and I think land will then end up in the wrong hands, and it's not what we want to see the land happening to the land. So, as I say, this story will run and run. I don't know, this is just a start. I think there has to be something happened, and there's going to be protests in London. I think it's 19th of November, there's protests, and there's a whole load of stuff happening in the background. There's talk about lack of supply, do we hold back supply, all sorts of things. But it's really rattled the UK farmer, hence why I thought it was worth doing this video. Anyway, I'll discuss it later in the future, but that gives you an update of where we are on this situation at the moment. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, keep watching, keep subscribing, more videos coming on very soon.